The moment I started preparing for Thanksgiving, I felt the familiar sinking feeling in my stomach. Once again, my family treated my home like a free hotel, eating everything in sight and leaving me to foot the bill. My mother, with her narrow eyes and permanent air of superiority, always favored my brother Mark, who sauntered in like he owned the place, expecting me to cater to his every whim. This year, however, I had a plan. I had sold my house just days before the holiday. I couldn't wait to see their faces when they realized they couldn't just invade my space anymore. The clock was ticking, and I was ready to confront them with the truth. I had spent years putting up with their demands, their dismissive comments about my cooking, and their belief that I would always be there to serve them. Every Thanksgiving had become a predictable routine. My family arrived with empty stomachs, ready to devour the turkey, stuffing, and pies I slaved over for hours. My mother would always compliment Mark's contributions while dismissing mine as expected. The unspoken rule was clear. I was the provider and they were the takers. Over the years, I had calculated the costs, at least $500 each holiday for food alone, not counting utilities and cleanup. As I packed away the last of the dishes, I felt the weight of their entitlement pressing down on me, especially as they grumbled about my lack of hospitality. This year, however, they would face the consequences of their actions. A week before Thanksgiving, I overheard my mother and Mark in the kitchen, laughing about how I would never dare to change the tradition. "Sarah will always be there to serve us," Mark joked, dismissing my hard work. I grabbed my phone, my heart racing as I read through the closing documents for my house sale. In that moment it became clear. I was not just a servant in their eyes, but a tool they could always rely on. The humiliation stung, igniting a fire within me. I resolved that this year would be different. I would not be there to clean up after them. Every Thanksgiving had become a predictable routine. My family arrived with empty stomachs, ready to devour the turkey, stuffing, and pies I slaved over for hours. It felt like a marathon of cooking, shopping, and cleaning, all for a group that never appreciated my efforts. My mother would always compliment Mark's contributions, praising his measly side dish while dismissing mine as expected. The unspoken rule was clear. I was the provider and they were the takers. I had spent years putting up with their demands, their dismissive comments about my cooking, and their belief that I would always be there to serve them. I remember one Thanksgiving vividly. I had spent 2 days preparing, buying a fresh, organic turkey and all the fixings. I woke up early that morning, filled with a mix of excitement and dread. I wanted it to be perfect, but deep down I knew how it would go. My parents, along with Mark, would waltz in, ready to consume everything I had prepared, and then leave without so much as a thank you. Sure enough, when they arrived, my mother didn't even glance at the table I had set up. Instead, she immediately asked Mark if he had brought that store-bought dip he loved, as if my homemade offerings didn't exist. The costs of these yearly feasts were staggering. I had calculated it all, at least $500 each holiday for food alone, not counting utilities and cleanup. I did this every year, and for what? To be met with grumbling about how my stuffing was too dry, or how my cranberry sauce just wasn't the same as the one from the can. The weight of their entitlement pressed down on me, and I felt smaller each year. As I packed away the last of the dishes, I would hear the same old complaints about my lack of hospitality, and how I was ruining the family traditions. This year, however, I felt different. The familiar mix of frustration and resignation was starting to melt away, replaced by something new: resolve. I had finally had enough of being treated like a doormat. I had poured my heart into these gatherings and all they did was take. It was exhausting. I was tired of being the one to make everything happen while they lounged around, expecting me to cater to their every whim. As I scrubbed the last dish, my mind raced with thoughts of how I could finally put a stop to it. I thought about how many times I had let their comments slide, how many times I had bitten my tongue while they belittled my efforts. I had been the butt of their jokes, the family servant, and I was done with it. The anger and disappointment began to crystallize into a plan. I could almost hear their voices echoing in my mind, my mother's condescending tone, Mark's mocking laughter. It was clear that they saw me as just an extension of their needs, a tool for their convenience. This year, I would not be the one who made it all happen. I would not be the one who picked up the pieces after their chaos. I would finally take a stand. Their entitlement would not be tolerated any longer. I began to envision their faces when they realized that this year would be different. They would have to fend for themselves and I couldn't wait. The clock was ticking, and I was ready to confront them with the truth. I was going to show them that I was no longer a pawn in their game, but a player in my own life. The decision to sell my house had been monumental, and I felt a rush of freedom with each passing day. I was ready to reclaim my life, to set my own traditions and live without the burden of their expectations. I smiled at the thought of my mother's horror when she found out I would not be hosting Thanksgiving this year. It was time for them to face the reality of their actions and how they impacted me. This year they would not be able to rely on me. I could already imagine the chaos that would ensue. The realization that they could no longer invade my home, that I had finally set a boundary, filled me with a sense of power and excitement. I was ready to break the cycle of their entitlement. Thanksgiving would no longer mean stress and obligation for me. No more would I be the one left cleaning up after their messes. This year I was determined to change the narrative. I would not be the one to carry the load. The burden was theirs to bear, and I was ready to set them free from relying on me. It was time they learned the true meaning of family and responsibility. I took a deep breath, ready to embrace the challenge ahead. A week before Thanksgiving, I overheard my mother and Mark in the kitchen, laughing about how I would never dare to change the tradition. "Sarah will always be there to serve us," Mark joked, pushing his luck as he often did. The words hit me like a slap in the face. I was so much more than just their servant. I grabbed my phone, my heart racing as I read through the closing documents for my house sale, which had gone through just days prior. In that moment it became painfully clear. I was not just a servant in their eyes, but a tool they could always rely on. The humiliation stung, igniting a fire within me. I resolved that this year would be different. I would not be there to clean up after them. The realization that they saw me as a reliable source for their Thanksgiving indulgences, a mere fixture in their plans, boiled my blood. I had spent years putting up with their demands, their dismissive comments about my cooking, and their belief that I would always be there to serve them. Year after year, I had allowed their entitlement to overshadow my own needs and desires. This time I was not going to let that happen. I was done being the family doormat, and I was ready to confront them with the truth. I could still hear Mark's laughter ringing in my ears as I paced around my empty house. The kitchen, once filled with the aroma of roasting turkey and baking pies, was now a reminder of the chains I had worn for too long. I could picture my mother's smirk, the way she'd dismiss my hard work as if it were expected. I had poured my heart into every gathering, yet they took it all for granted. My mother and Mark were used to my hospitality, and I was ready to disrupt their expectations. I could almost hear their voices echoing in my mind, my mother's condescending tone, Mark's mocking laughter. It was time to change the script. The humiliation of years past fueled my determination. I would not be the one who made it all happen again. I would not be the one who picked up the pieces after their chaos. They would have to fend for themselves this year, and I was ready to watch it unfold. The thought of their faces when they realized I was serious about not hosting this year sent a thrill of excitement through me. I could already imagine the disbelief, the confusion, and then the anger. They would have to confront the consequences of their actions for once. I had always been their fallback, the one who would pick up the pieces when they decided to take the easy route. But now I was ready to break that cycle. I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of emotions, fear, excitement, and a strange sense of liberation. I had finally taken control of my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone drag me back into their toxic patterns. I thought about how many times I had let their comments slide, how many times I had bitten my tongue while they belittled my efforts. I had been the butt of their jokes for too long, and now it was time for me to reclaim my dignity. The clock was ticking down to Thanksgiving, and I felt a mixture of anxiety and exhilaration. I had made my decision and there was no turning back. I would not be the one to cater to their every whim. I would no longer be the one bearing the burden of their entitlement. In the days leading up to the holiday, I felt lighter with each passing hour. I was ready to embrace the chaos that would come, knowing that I was finally standing up for myself. Thanksgiving would no longer mean stress and obligation for me. I was reclaiming my power, and I was ready to see how they would react when confronted with the reality of my absence. It was time for them to learn the true meaning of family and responsibility. I took a deep breath, ready to embrace the challenge ahead. This year I was determined to change the narrative. I would not be the one to carry the load. The burden was theirs to bear, and I was ready to set them free from relying on me. This was the year I would break the cycle. No more would I be the one left scrambling to ensure everything was perfect while they lounged around, expecting me to cater to their every need. I was ready to step into my own life and create a new path, one where I was no longer defined by my family's expectations. The satisfaction of breaking free from their grasp was already a victory, and I couldn't wait to see how they would handle it. On the day before Thanksgiving, I felt a rush of adrenaline as I composed a text message to my family. I typed it out carefully, each word a declaration of my newfound resolve. I informed them that I would not be hosting Thanksgiving this year. I explained that my house had been sold, and it was time for them to find another venue for the feast. My fingers trembled slightly as I hit send, but I knew this was necessary. It was time for them to face the reality of their actions. When my mother called, her voice was laced with disbelief and anger. "You can't just abandon tradition, Sarah. What about the family?" she demanded, her tone sharp and accusatory. I could hear the panic in her voice, and a small part of me felt guilty, but I quickly pushed that feeling aside. I had lived my life in the shadows of their expectations for far too long. "You all take advantage of me every year. It's time for you to figure it out on your own," I replied firmly, my heart pounding as I spoke. I was no longer the timid daughter who would bend and break under pressure. I was standing my ground. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost picture my mother's face, her expression a mix of shock and fury. I knew she was used to getting her way, and my decision was a direct challenge to her authority. But this time I wasn't backing down. "You can't do this to us," she exclaimed, her voice rising. "You're ruining Thanksgiving for everyone." Her words were meant to guilt-trip me, but instead, they fueled my determination. I had spent years being the one to make everything happen, and now I was taking a stand for myself. "You know what? I'm not ruining anything. You all have taken me for granted for too long. I deserve to enjoy my holiday just like everyone else," I said, my voice steady. I could feel the strength within me growing with each word. It felt liberating to finally speak my mind. "This is just a phase, Sarah. You'll come to your senses," she shot back, dismissing my decision as if it were nothing. I could hear Mark's voice in the background, chiming in with his usual arrogance, no doubt trying to convince her that I would never go through with it. But I was serious this time. I hung up the phone, a mix of exhilaration and anxiety coursing through me. I had set a boundary, and I was ready to face the fallout. I knew they would not take it well, but I also knew that this was a necessary step for my own peace of mind. As the day progressed, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I had been so tired of the same old routine, the same old expectations. Each Thanksgiving had become a predictable cycle of them showing up, eating everything in sight, and leaving without a second thought. I was done being the one who made it all happen while they lounged around, enjoying the fruits of my labor. The phone buzzed again, and this time it was a group message from my family. They were trying to rally together, sending guilt-laden reminders of the family traditions, and how much they would miss my cooking. "Come on, it's just one day. Don't be selfish," Mark's message read, dripping with entitlement. I read through their messages, feeling the pressure mount as they attempted to manipulate my sense of duty. "You're abandoning us during Thanksgiving," they chanted like a mantra, hoping to wear me down. But deep down I felt a sense of strength. I was not going to cave in this time. I spent the evening reflecting on how far I had come. I had been the family servant for years, and now I was ready to reclaim my life. I didn't owe them anything, and their attempts to guilt me only solidified my resolve. I had finally realized that I deserved to be treated with respect and gratitude, not as a mere provider for their whims. Thanksgiving Day was looming, and I felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. I knew my family would show up at my old house, expecting the door to be open and the table set with the usual feast. Instead, they would be met with the new owners, and I couldn't help but feel a thrill at the thought of their shock and confusion. As I prepared for the day, I felt a sense of peace surround me. I had taken control of my life, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. Thanksgiving would no longer be a day of stress and obligation. I was ready to experience the freedom that came with standing up for myself, and I couldn't wait to see how my family would react when they realized I was serious about my decision. As the holiday approached, my family began to pressure me, sending messages filled with guilt. "You won't let us down, will you?" my mother begged, her words dripping with the kind of desperation that made me squirm. I could almost hear her voice trembling through the screen, the tone she used when she felt she was losing control. Mark chimed in, his text a reminder of the countless holiday gatherings where I had catered to their every need. "Come on, it's just one day. Don't be selfish," he added, trying to appeal to my sense of duty as the dutiful daughter. They didn't care about my feelings. All they wanted was to maintain the status quo, to keep me in my place as their reliable provider. I could feel the walls closing in as they tried to manipulate my sense of obligation. "You're abandoning us during Thanksgiving," they chanted like a mantra, hoping I would relent and give in to their demands. But I held my ground, determined to see my plan through. Each text was like a dagger, digging into my resolve. My mother's messages were filled with reminders of our family traditions, photos from Thanksgivings past, and the way we used to laugh around the table. I could almost hear her voice echoing in my mind, reminding me of how family was supposed to come together. But I wasn't the one abandoning the family. They were the ones abandoning the idea of appreciating what I brought to the table. I spent hours wrestling with my emotions, feeling the pressure build as they flooded my phone with guilt-ridden messages. Some were subtle, like when my mother would say, "You know how much Thanksgiving means to us." Others were more direct, like Mark's insistence that I was ruining the holiday by not hosting. They painted me as the villain, the one who was breaking apart the family unit, and it made me furious. I was tired of being the scapegoat for their grievances. I had spent years catering to their whims, putting my own needs aside in the process. And for what? To be met with grumbling about how my stuffing was too dry, or how my cranberry sauce just wasn't the same as the one from the can. No more. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the strength I had found in my decision. I was not going to let their emotional blackmail dictate my choices any longer. I began to draft a response, my fingers hovering over the screen. I wanted to remind them that this was my life, my decision, and I had every right to choose how I spent my holidays. Then, in a moment of clarity, I decided to send a different message. I wanted to show them that I was serious, that I was not going to allow their guilt to sway me. I typed out a response, firm yet calm. "I'm sorry, but I won't be hosting Thanksgiving this year. You all need to figure it out on your own. I can't keep sacrificing my happiness for the sake of tradition. I hope you understand." As I hit send, a rush of adrenaline coursed through me. I was finally standing up for myself, and it felt exhilarating. I could already imagine the fallout, the chaos that would ensue when they realized I was serious. The panic would set in, and I would finally be free of their expectations. But just as I was about to relish that thought, my phone buzzed again. It was another message from my mother, this one more frantic than the others. "What do you mean you won't be hosting? We've been doing this for years. You can't just change everything." I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the inevitable pushback. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for the confrontation. I was no longer the timid daughter who could be easily manipulated by guilt. I was a woman who had finally found her voice, and I was determined to use it. As the day drew closer, I felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement. I had made my decision, and I knew I couldn't turn back. I was ready to face the fallout, to see how my family would react when they realized I was serious about not hosting. I could already picture their faces, the shock, the confusion, and then the anger as they tried to make sense of it all. I was finally reclaiming my life, and I couldn't wait to see how it all unfolded. No more would I be the one left scrambling to ensure everything was perfect while they lounged around, expecting me to cater to their every need. This time the burden was theirs to bear. Thanksgiving would no longer mean stress and obligation for me. I was finally ready to embrace my newfound freedom. Thanksgiving Day arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. I had spent the night before in a restless sleep, tossing and turning as I thought about what was to come. My family would show up at my old house, expecting the door to be wide open and the table overflowing with all their favorite dishes. But instead they would be met with the new owners, a couple who had no idea about the family drama that was about to unfold. I parked my car a few blocks away, my heart racing as I watched the scene unfold from a distance. As I sat there, I could feel the anxiety bubbling within me, But there was also a sense of exhilaration. I had stood my ground, and now I was about to witness the consequences of my decision. I watched as my mother's car pulled up, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it. They were about to find out that I was serious about taking a step back from my role in the family dynamic. I could see them getting out of the car, my mother adjusting her scarf, and Mark strutting up to the door, as if he owned the place. There was an air of entitlement about them that made me roll my eyes. They approached the door with confidence, completely unaware that things were about to change. When they knocked, I held my breath, waiting for the moment the door would swing open. I could almost hear my mother's voice ringing out, demanding to be let in, as if she had any right to waltz in uninvited. A few moments later, I saw the new owners emerge, looking confused as they faced my family. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of their expressions when they realized they would not be greeted by my warm hospitality. "What do you mean you bought the house?" I heard my mother's voice rising above the rest, a mix of disbelief and indignation. Mark was already trying to assert his dominance, striding forward and speaking like he always did, as if his mere presence demanded respect. But this time they were met with resistance. The new owner stood their ground, explaining that they had closed the deal just days before. I could see the panic setting in. My mother's face turned crimson as she grasped the reality of the situation. They were used to me being there, ready to cater to their every whim, and now they were faced with the stark truth that I was no longer their safety net. The chaos erupted as my family confronted the new owners. "What do you mean you bought the house?" My mother shouted again, her voice shrill and frantic. Mark attempted to regain control, trying to negotiate with them, but they remained firm. I watched with a mix of satisfaction and disbelief as they floundered, realizing they had lost their anchor. I could see my mother gesturing wildly, her hands flailing as she tried to explain how they were supposed to be welcomed inside, how this was a family tradition. It was almost comical to see them struggle without me. All those years of me being the one to cook, clean, and prepare. Now they were floundering without the support they had taken for granted. I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me as I sat in my car, witnessing their unraveling. They had relied on me for too long, and now they were facing the consequences of their actions. I had finally taken a stand, and it was exhilarating to see them panic. I had spent years being the one to ensure everything went smoothly, and now I was free from that burden. As I sat there, I couldn't help but feel a sense of liberation. I had broken the cycle of enabling their behavior, and watching them struggle was a reminder of why I had made this decision. I was no longer the one who would pick up the pieces after their chaos. They were going to have to figure it out themselves, and I was completely okay with that. I watched as they continued to argue with the new owners, my mother raising her voice in frustration. It was clear they were not prepared for this situation. They had come expecting the same old routine, the same old comfortable chaos that they had relied on for years. But now there was no safety net. They were on their own. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I decided it was time to leave. I had witnessed enough. I pulled away from the curb, a smile creeping onto my face as I drove away. I was finally free. The satisfaction I felt was overwhelming. They were finally seeing the truth without my help. I had taken the necessary steps to reclaim my life, and I was ready to embrace my future, free from their toxic grasp. The chaos erupted as my family confronted the new owners. "What do you mean you bought the house?" My mother shouted at the bewildered couple, her voice rising in anger and disbelief. Mark was beside her, his face a picture of confusion, trying to grasp the reality of the situation. He stepped forward, attempting to assert his usual dominance, but the couple stood their ground, clearly taken aback by the sudden confrontation. I watched from my car, parked a few blocks away, feeling a mixture of exhilaration and satisfaction. They were used to me being there, the one who fixed everything, who catered to their every need. Now they were floundering without their safety net, and it felt like justice had finally come to light. "We need to get inside. This is ridiculous," my mother continued, her hands flailing in the air as she tried to make sense of the unexpected turn of events. She had always been the one to orchestrate these gatherings, and now she was the one left outside, facing the cold reality that the world wouldn't bend to her will. Mark, ever the favorite son, was trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. "Look, we've been coming here for years. You can't just kick us out." We have family traditions." His voice was firm, but I could see the cracks beginning to form in his confidence. The new owners looked at each other, clearly confused, unsure of how to respond to this unexpected barrage. As I sat in my car, I couldn't help but feel a sense of liberation wash over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. They had relied on me for too long, and now they were facing the consequences of their actions. I had finally taken a stand, and it was exhilarating to see them panic. The couple explained patiently that they had bought the house just days before, and that they were not going to host my family for Thanksgiving. They had no idea about the family dynamics at play, and it was almost comical to see my family squirm as they tried to explain their way into someone else's home. My mother's face turned crimson, and I could see the anger rising in her. "You don't understand. This is our family tradition," she pleaded, her voice trembling with frustration. Mark tried to throw in a few more arguments, but the couple remained firm, clearly overwhelmed by the scene unfolding before them. I felt a rush of satisfaction. They were finally seeing how ridiculous their entitlement looked from the outside. "Tradition or not, you can't just demand to be let in. This is our home now," one of the new owners replied, their patience starting to wear thin. I could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. My family was used to having everything go their way, and now they were met with opposition. It was a sight I had longed to witness. As I continued to watch from my hiding place, I felt the weight of years of resentment begin to lift. I had spent so long being the one who made everything happen, the one who catered to their whims while they lounged around, expecting me to do it all. Now they were faced with the reality that they had taken me for granted, and it was beautiful to see them struggling to cope without me. Mark's voice grew louder as he tried to maintain some control over the situation. "You don't know who you're dealing with. We're family," he shouted, desperation creeping into his tone. But family didn't mean much when you had burned all your bridges. I felt a swell of pride knowing I had finally broken free from their toxic grasp. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the couple firmly told my family they needed to leave. "We're sorry, but this is not your home anymore. You need to go," one of them said, their tone serious. I watched as my mother's expression shifted from anger to disbelief, her eyes widening as the reality of the situation sank in. They were being kicked out and there was nothing they could do about it. As they turned away, I couldn't help but let out a small laugh. The sight of them trying to regroup, their heads huddled together as they whispered and plotted, was almost comical. They had relied on my efforts for so long that they didn't know how to handle a situation where I wasn't there to pick up the pieces. I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. I had finally taken a stand, and it felt exhilarating to see them panic. They were facing the consequences of their actions, and I was finally free from the burden of enabling their behavior. I had broken the cycle, and now they were left to deal with the fallout. As I pulled away from the curb, a smile crept onto my face. I had witnessed the chaos, and now it was time for me to embrace my newfound freedom. I was ready to move on, to build a life free from their toxic influence. The satisfaction I felt was overwhelming. I had taken control of my life, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. As the situation escalated, my family turned on each other like rabid dogs, and it was a sight to behold. "You ruined everything, Sarah," my mother screamed into her phone, her voice cracking under the weight of her outrage. I could practically hear the venom in her tone, her fury directed at me as if I were the one who had upended their holiday plans. Mark, desperate to salvage his pride, jumped in shouting, "You're selfish for leaving us out to dry." Their anger and embarrassment were palpable, but instead of remorse, they sought to blame me for their predicament. I watched from my car, parked a safe distance away, feeling a mix of disbelief and satisfaction as their perfect family facade crumbled before my eyes. For years they had relied on me, and now without their safety net they were floundering. Mark's bravado faded as he faced the reality that he had no plan. He was just as lost as my mother. The chaos they had always created was now turned against them, and it felt like justice. "This is your fault, Sarah," my mother wailed, her voice echoing through the phone. I could hear the desperation in her tone, the frantic need to shift the blame onto me for their disarray. "How could you do this to your family? We've always counted on you." She was throwing a tantrum, and it was almost entertaining to see how quickly her mask slipped. Mark chimed in, trying to assert some control over the situation. You think you can just walk away from family? You're abandoning us during Thanksgiving. His words dripped with manipulation, as if he truly believed I owed them my time, my energy, my life. But I felt nothing but liberation. Their attempts to guilt me only fueled my resolve. I had spent years being their doormat, and now I was finally free. I didn't need their approval or their gratitude. I had stepped out of their chaotic dance, and it felt good. Their anger was a reflection of their own incompetence, and I was finally seeing them for what they were: selfish, entitled, and completely incapable of handling their own lives. As they continued to berate me, I could see how their frustration turned inward. My mother, who had always positioned herself as the matriarch, was flailing. Her confidence was shattered, and she struggled to keep her composure. You can't just change everything, Sarah. This is how it's always been, she shouted, her voice laced with panic. I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. They were finally experiencing the consequences of their actions, and I was here for it. No longer would I be the one to cater to their every whim, to clean up their messes, to make sure they were comfortable. They were now facing the reality that they had taken me for granted for far too long. Mark, realizing his usual tactics were failing, turned to my mother. We can't just stand here. We need to figure something out. The panic in his voice was evident. I could see the tension between them as they started to bicker, pointing fingers at each other in their time of crisis. The dynamic that had held them together for so long was fraying at the edges, unraveling with each passing moment. I leaned back in my seat, a smile creeping onto my face as I watched them fall apart. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment they realized they couldn't rely on me anymore. They were experiencing the chaos they had always created, but now it was directed at them. They were lost without me, and I was reveling in it. You need to fix this, Sarah. You can't just leave us like this. My mother continued, her voice rising higher with each word. I could hear the desperation, the fear of losing their control over me. But I had no intention of giving in. I had finally found my strength, and I wasn't about to let their emotional manipulation pull me back into their toxic web. As the argument escalated, I could feel the weight of years of resentment start to lift. I had always been the one to ensure everything went smoothly, the one who sacrificed my happiness for the sake of family tradition. But not anymore. I had taken a stand, and I was finally free from their grasp. I watched as the new owners were caught in the middle of this family drama, clearly confused and overwhelmed. They had no idea what they were stepping into, and it was almost comical to see my family trying to explain their way into someone else's home. We're family. You can't just kick us out, Mark shouted, his desperation evident. But family didn't mean much when the ties had been severed. I felt a swell of pride knowing I had finally broken free from their toxic grasp. As I sat there, I realized that I had won. I had stood up for myself, and in doing so, I had liberated myself from their expectations. I was no longer the one who would pick up the pieces after their chaos. They were going to have to figure it out themselves, and I was completely okay with that. As their voices faded into the distance, I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years. I was finally ready to embrace my newfound freedom, ready to move on with my life without the burden of their toxicity. The victory was mine, and I felt at peace knowing I had taken control of my destiny. Later that day, I received a call from one of my old friends who lived nearby, and had seen the chaos unfold. Looks like they really fell apart without you, she said, her voice filled with a mix of sympathy and disbelief. It was almost surreal to hear someone else acknowledge what I had just witnessed. I had been so wrapped up in my own liberation that I hadn't fully processed how significant this moment was. As I listened to her recount the scene, it hit me. Mark and my mother were completely incompetent without me. In the years I had spent catering to their every need, I had somehow convinced myself that I was indispensable to them. I had thought they needed me, that without my contributions everything would fall apart. But the reality was starkly different. They had relied on my hard work and planning for years, and now they were floundering. It felt liberating to realize that I wasn't the glue holding our family together. It was the dysfunction that had become the norm. As my friend continued talking, I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation wash over me. I had freed myself from their grasp, and the fear of their disapproval faded away, leaving me with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in ages. I had finally taken a stand, and I was ready to embrace the life I had long yearned for, one free from their toxicity. I hung up the phone and took a moment to just breathe. The chaos from earlier still echoed in my mind, a reminder of why I had made this choice. I had spent too many years being the caretaker, the one who picked up the pieces after their messes. I realized now that I had been trapped in a cycle of enabling their behavior for far too long. And today I had broken that cycle. I felt my heart swell with pride. I had stood up for myself, and in doing so, I had liberated myself from their expectations. I no longer felt the weight of their demands pressing down on me. I was no longer the one who would cater to their whims or sacrifice my own happiness for the sake of family. The sense of empowerment that coursed through me was intoxicating. I was finally free to live life on my own terms. As I sat there reflecting, I remembered all the times I had bent over backward to make sure they were happy. I thought about the countless holidays I had spent cooking, cleaning, and preparing only to be met with indifference or outright dismissal. I had always been the dutiful daughter, the one who kept the peace, but at what cost? The answer was clear now. I had paid a hefty price for their approval, and it had cost me my own joy. I had allowed their favoritism and entitlement to dictate my worth, and I could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface as I thought about it. Mark's smugness, my mother's superiority complex. It was all so infuriating. But today I had finally taken a stand, and I was prepared to embrace the future I had always wanted. One where I was free from their toxic influence. I envisioned my new life. A cozy apartment filled with the things I loved. A space where I could create my own traditions without fear of judgment or criticism. I pictured Thanksgiving dinners with friends who appreciated me for who I was, not what I could do for them. This was the kind of life I had always dreamed of, and it was within my grasp now. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over everything, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I was ready to move on, to embrace the freedom I had fought so hard to achieve. I picked up my phone to scroll through my messages, and I was surprised to see several missed calls from my mother and Mark. They were desperate to reach me, no doubt trying to salvage the situation. But I didn't feel compelled to respond. The thought of engaging with them again, of hearing their guilt-laden messages and weak attempts to manipulate me, only reinforced my decision to cut ties. I wanted to preserve the peace I had finally found and not let them drag me back into their chaotic world. Instead, I took a deep breath and decided to turn my phone off for the night. I wanted to enjoy this moment of victory without any interference. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into my favorite spot on the couch, surrounded by the comfort of my own space. I felt a sense of victory wash over me, a feeling that I had reclaimed my life. The freedom to choose my own path was exhilarating. I reflected on all the years I had spent trying to please my family, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret for not doing this sooner. But then again, I knew that I had to experience the pain of their toxicity to truly appreciate the beauty of freedom. As I sipped my wine, I made a promise to myself. I would never allow anyone to dictate my worth again. I would embrace my independence and build a life that reflected my values and desires. No more catering to their demands or sacrificing my happiness for the sake of family harmony. I was finally ready to live for myself. As the evening wore on, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I was excited to explore what life had in store for me. I had dreams to chase, adventures to embark on, and a future to build. One that was entirely my own. The victory was mine, and I felt at peace knowing I had taken control of my destiny. As the dust settled, I took a moment to reflect on my journey. I moved into a cozy apartment, filled with light and my own personal touches. No longer was I surrounded by the chaos of my family. Instead, I had created my own sanctuary. Thanksgiving had transformed from a day of stress into one of liberation. I spent the holiday with friends who truly appreciated me, sharing laughter and joy without the shadow of guilt hanging over my head. Whenever my mother or Mark called, I listened, but I no longer felt that familiar tug of obligation. Their attempts to guilt-trip me fell flat as I maintained my distance. I realized that I could choose how to spend my time, and it didn't have to revolve around their needs anymore. Each call reminded me of how far I had come and solidified my resolve to keep my new life intact. I started new traditions that reflected who I was, not who they wanted me to be. I cooked meals that made me happy, invited people who brought positivity into my life, and celebrated in ways that felt fulfilling. I even took a spontaneous trip to a place I always wanted to visit, something I never had the freedom to do before. The exhilaration of independence was intoxicating. My heart swelled with pride as I embraced this new normal. I was finally at peace, free from the toxic patterns that had once defined me. I had taken control of my life and it felt incredible. The victory was mine, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. My future was bright, and I was excited to live it on my own terms.